we've been having a discussion and an argument about how to describe the company. You know, we're big on elevator pitches. And the question was, do we talk about growth or do we talk about innovation? You wanted to talk about the growth story. You're the CEO, you win. How many users do you have?
Yeah, so we have 18 million users now and adding 1 million per month. I think actually during this year we might get up to a rate of 2 million per month. So it's a pretty expansive, exponential curve, if you will.
So you think you'll get to 2 million a month during this year?
Yes, yeah.
All right, so I think that that's one part of your growth story.
Yeah.
I think a number I didn't know until you and I really focused on it yesterday. How many people here have done a serious Prezi project? All right, so of the people that have done that, how many of you have contributed your project to the public website? Or are they all private? We got one. So that means most people here are paying customers because you know the business model is?
Yeah, you can use Prezi for free as long as you're willing to publish the presentations. So sometimes people say pay with content even. But yeah, if you're willing to pay for Prezi, then you can have privacy for your Prezis. And actually, of the 50 million Prezis that have already been created, a majority of them are actually publicly available on our site right now and can be used as inspiration if you're looking to do something very beautiful and exciting.
Test question. So we had a lot of Prezi hands go up. How many of you have gone onto the website to look at the presentations that are stored there to get ideas or get inspiration or get content? All right, so only a few hands based on the number that went up, which means we still got a challenge to let everybody know. How much is there? Tell us what's there.
Yeah, so there's, many different use cases where this can be used, but say you're a history teacher and you want to teach your students about the civil rights movements. There's probably 1,000 Prezis right now on the civil rights movements, and many of them are not just public, but if the author have given permission to reuse the Prezi, essentially you can take, with a click of a button, you can save that Prezi to your file and build on top of that, so you don't have to start from scratch, but continue other people's work, and that's actually a new thing that we're seeing to start take hold on the market, actually.
So I don't know if you've given the number out, but let's just assume there are tens of millions of presentations that are on the site.
Yeah.
So what you're telling me is I can sit down, I can go on the site, I can type in some keywords,
yep,
and I'll get a list of presentations and I can browse through them.
That's right.
Have you thought about any ranking system for quality of presentations or?
Yeah, so we do some of that, and in fact, I think during the next year or so, we'll be even more innovative on how we're going to do that. But already now, there's all the fundamental ranking in place, so the better a Prezi is in terms of content, in terms of how beautiful it is, it should be ranked already in your search.
Okay, so we've talked about the growth story. You're happy with that?
Yes, well, one more thing about that. I'm very proud of the fact that right now we have 120 people from 20 different countries. We have a strong presence in Europe, and we'll be talking about this soon in the US as well. And just last month, we opened up in Asia as well, and all this being cash flow positive. So I think that it's a little bit unusual when at this early stage of a startup, but we're of course very proud of it. So,
all right. So, where I think the power of the technology is going forward is it's not a PowerPoint replacement. It's really a brand new category of what I call an innovation engine. I've described it to people as the new next generation virtual whiteboard.
Yeah.
So talk about what you can do today. Let's just assume you've got a group of people in a meeting and they've all come in with a MacBook Air or something or an iPad.
Right.
And what would you do? Why is it an innovation engine?
Right. Well, Prezi is mostly known really for the beautiful presentations and people standing on a stage and showing these nice visualizations. But we also have a feature now with Prezi called Prezi Meeting, where people can connect their laptops and co-edit presentations. And what we're seeing now is that Prezi is not just being used as this stunning presentation tool, but also just to come to a meeting, brainstorm together, and instead of having to take a picture of a whiteboard, start to email that picture around and assign a person to make slides of that, people are taking that whiteboard, walking into a pitch, and giving that pitch without having to kind of translate the whiteboard into another format. And I think this is really starting to matter and being picked up as well, because it condenses the iteration from brainstorming to pitching an idea to almost be a seamless process where you can go back and forth. And that matters nowadays because I believe that the bar on creative thinking have been raised. So 10 years ago, if you went to a meeting and you sat down in a meeting and you came with an idea, it was going to be unique because you have a unique perspective. Today, if you go to that very same meeting and you pitch an idea, then somebody takes up their phone, they put it in Google, and now all of a sudden you have access to the thinking of 3 billion people, and it may seem very quickly that your thought is not that unique anymore. And this, I think, is both an opportunity and a challenge, right? What's the opportunity? Well, you have access to a market of 3 billion people thanks to the internet. But the challenge is, how do you bring something unique? How do you bring something new to the market? And if you can do that, then you have, as many startups have in this conference, a great opportunity to build something big. But it's all about how can you make that process of innovation or iteration a quick one. And one way of doing that is just having tools that enable you to bridge this gap between brainstorming and pitching the idea.
So if I understand you right, we're all sitting in a meeting, we've all got our laptops or whatever, and we could have an iPad, but let's just say right now laptop.
Yeah.
And we're sitting there doing work and everybody sees the same screen.
Exactly.
So when and if I add something in real time, people are watching how it goes in.
That's right.
And so it's a whiteboard, virtual, meeting over, we've all got the whiteboard with us, nothing else has to happen.
Nothing else has to happen, and you can take your whiteboard with you and pitch your idea. That's exactly right. And nowadays, your iPhone, your iPad is syncing automatically. So even if you don't have your computer with you, you can kind of take your iPhone, connect it to the projector. Easy way of doing that is using Apple TV, and all of a sudden, boom, you're ready to pitch your idea.
So we can sit there in the same room. We're all hooked up to Apple TV. You've got a big monitor. That's then your visual whiteboard, but you still got all the information. You still got all your information captured. Can you hear me? Nobody's ever accused me of being quiet until today, so I'm sorry if you can't hear me.
Yeah. No, and I think this, this shift in how people are sharing ideas is going to have a huge impact on our work life and the way we do education and all of that. We see that in every industry nowadays, but the people who can effectively mine this new idea economy will have access to this enormous market. So I think that's an interesting new world opening up for everyone.
So let's switch gears a little bit and start to set the stage for what we're going to do here in the next section. You shared with me, and I think we can share it, your parents escaped from Hungary.
Yep.
They literally went up over the Alps, I think you said, and you're sitting here now, N years later, with how many people in Budapest?
We have 80 people in Budapest right now. Yeah.
Why Budapest?
Well, very easy thing. My two co-founders are Hungarian, and I was raised at home speaking Hungarian, and so when the three of us got together, it was never a question that we would start this company in Budapest. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it was, of course, a big decision. At the time, I had just built my previous company that was just taking off in Sweden. So a lot of my friends and family were surprised, of course, of me making the move, but I have never regretted it.
How'd you get the idea? So you're sitting there with two friends in Budapest, and you get an idea which I think is revolutionary. Where'd it come from? How did it? I love the stories, and I ask all our great entrepreneurs, how'd you think of that?
Yeah, so it's very much thanks to my co-founder, Adam, actually. He's a visual artist that has traveled around the world doing amazing exhibitions. And one of the art form that he was doing was this very nice, moving visuals. And then people would come up to him and ask, that was so nice, but is there a way for me to do those nice visuals? And Adam would tell them, well, yeah, first you got to learn how to code. And then you got to learn how to calculate transitions because there's a little bit of math to it. And by the time he had told them this, everyone was okay. You know, it sounded like a good idea, but I'm not up for it. So when we came together, our only goal was to enable everyone to create beautiful images like Adam had created in his exhibitions without having the skills of coding or even transition calculations. That's pretty much it.
All right, so now let's start to move into the next section. You're sitting here with 80 people in Budapest, and you decide it's time to go to the States.
Yeah.
Take us through that thought process and why you ended up where you did.
Well, it actually was a part of our plan from our second year of operation. So the first year, we essentially spent time on figuring out what is this nice canvas of ideas. We didn't know ourselves. But by the time we launched Prezi, and it took us a full year to kind of just lay the foundation, the time we actually launched Prezi, we knew that we wanted to enable 2 billion people to share ideas in a much more fun and engaging way than it had ever been done. And so, okay, now here we are in Budapest, at this time a fairly small team, and the question is, how can we tell the world that there's a new and a better way of sharing ideas? And for us, the answer to that question was very concise and amounted to the fact that we had to be successful on the US market. Why? Because the US market is the biggest presentation market in the world. And our success on the US market would essentially dictate all our future successes and our future failures, we believed. So as soon as we launched Prezi, actually one of the first things I did was to kind of sit myself on a plane and start looking whether we should open up offices in New York or San Francisco.
So we have 16 seconds left. It would be very self-serving of me to ask why you chose Excel. So instead, what I'm going to do is ask you, why did you choose Excel?
Right.
5 seconds.
Well, we're very fortunate in the sense that a lot of entrepreneurs are using Prezi to actually pitch their companies with. So we got to know a lot of different VCs. And I don't know if I said this, but Prezi was actually cash flow positive from year one. So we could take our time and get to know people well. And the people we fell in love with was Excel. So that's how.
End of commercial. Let's bring the next group up here. Come on and bring their chairs. You get a. All right. We've got a great panel. Sam, come on up. Sam Shank, and CEO and founder of HotelTonight. Jack, Hidary, and Martin. There's a chair. All right. So how many of you know Hotels Tonight? All right, so you've got a big announcement.
Yeah, that's right. We're That's right. We're pleased to announce today that HotelTonight, we've been expanding in Europe pretty aggressively, and we're pleased to announce that we're officially live now in Germany and in Switzerland. We're going to be adding about one city every week in Europe for the foreseeable future, and it's great to bring the value and the convenience of last-minute booking at great hotels to Germany, which is a very important market for us, and we see a lot of potential here.
Good. Excellent.
And a commercial, or?
We probably should stop. Well, Martin, you're the CEO and started a very interesting company, which is now the largest in Europe. Talk about Phone just quickly and what you did, and give us some quick background here, because you did an unusual set of things starting this in Spain.
Yeah, well, I like 18 years ago, I moved away from New York to Spain, and I built there Justel, Ya.com, Eolia, and Phone, 4 companies that got to be worth over $500 million to $2 billion in Spain. So I know there's a lot of debate about whether you should build companies in Silicon Valley or not. But Phone is also built out of Spain, even though actually most of our money came from Silicon Valley. So we were the first investment of Google in Europe, the first investment of Sequoia in Europe, and then we got 2 great European VCs, Atomico, Index, who are actually expanding the other way. In the case of Index, they went to Silicon Valley. And Phone first had a failed B2C model that we tried to distribute directly to consumers, and we almost went bankrupt. But then we changed to a model where we partnered with the largest telcos in the world, and we've been profitable for 3 years, and we're now the largest Wi-Fi network in the world with close to 8 million hotspots. And our biggest countries are many European countries and Japan.
And Jack, I looked at your resume today, and it sounds like you're on more boards than all my partners put together, which I think is okay. You started Dice. Talk about that. It's the largest tech job site in the U.S. anyway, if not the world.
Well, basically, Joe, our insight was that techies like ourselves, I was a coder from the age of 10, were like cobbler's children. We were building stuff for everybody else, but nobody was building stuff for us. And so the basic insight of the company was, let's build a job board, a content site for developers, for techies, for systems managers. We built the content site out, 15 different tech areas, Gamelan, Java sites, JavaScript sites, developer.com, used today worldwide. And we sold that off, and then we created Dice.com, and that became the #1 job board. Not because initially it had the most number of jobs. Actually, Monster and other job boards had more jobs. It was because we had this dogged persistence that we need to serve this one area, techies. And because of that focus, we then built salary surveys and other content around the job, and over 16 years, it's been the #1 leader for all that time, and profitable for that whole time, and then we took it public.
All right, so I want to get a bit controversial now. We'll involve the audience to the extent we can. When I agreed to do this panel, I said to Steffi, I'd like to be able to have a very candid conversation about issues that are on my mind. Let me say to you that we're huge believers in Europe. We excel. I was going to quit Axel in '99 at the end of the boom. I thought, I'd done what I wanted to do. My partners convinced me to go work on starting this thing in Europe. I got to know Kevin Kamoli, and in 2000 we did Axel 1. Perfect timing, right at after the crash, and we're sitting there on St. James with a 10-year lease, because I think that was the minimum they would give it to us for, saying, okay, so that's what venture capital's all about. We're betting on ourselves now. We're into Fund 4. And we've done very well, because we wouldn't be in Fund 4, we wouldn't be starting to raise Fund 4 if we weren't. The puzzle for me has been the following, and I'm going to tell you a quick story. I got a call about 4 years ago from the managing editor of Time magazine, and he wanted to know, he was writing an article on China, and he said, when is China going to become known as a global innovation leader? And I said, that's a great question, let me think about it. And I got this idea to go to the website, and I looked at all of the Nobel Prize winners. And I looked at all the tech Nobel Prize winners, not medicine and peace, just the physics and chemistry, et cetera, et cetera. And there have not been any from China. There have been Chinese who have won Nobel Prizes for work they did in English, German, and mainly American universities. But I was also struck by the fact of the reasonably equal distribution between Europe and the US for fundamental Nobel Prizes, because that is the fundamental innovation. In fact, if you want to predict 15 years in the future what's going to be hot, look at this year's Nobel Prize winners for physics and then project out 15 years. Start with the DNA, start with the genome, go out 15 years, and you will find the answer to what then becomes popular science. In spite of our success, I have not been able to intellectually answer the question. If you look at the top 10 websites, they really are, and I have to give credit to Skype. Skype got absorbed, and so we don't see it as a separate brand, and we don't see its statistics anymore, and it's a huge success. But why don't we see more Skypes in Europe in spite of all of the success they're having building what I think are very, very, very interesting companies? Martin, maybe you've written a lot of interesting articles on this. Why don't you kick it off?
No, I think that if you look at the United States, you could say, why is it that such few technology stars come from other places on the West Coast of the United States? And you could ask the same question about why is it that some of the best universities are in the East Coast, and yet Zuckerberg moves to Silicon Valley and everyone moves to Silicon Valley to start their companies in Silicon Valley or in Seattle. I think the world is divided on geographies that are related to passions. For example, Germans have a passion for cars. And why is it that Americans, when they have money, they dream of buying a German car and not an American car? And so you're choosing a narrow sector. You're saying web properties. And yes, Silicon Valley rules the world in that sector. That doesn't mean that the world moves on everything. You were mentioning the Nobel Prizes, and a lot of the work was done, and you said DNA, Watson Crick, a lot of the work was done in Cambridge. A lot of that Europeans are very good at science and many times bad at making money out of science is not seen as a fundamental flaw of many people who are in science, whose objective is not to make money, but to make the world a better place through their work. So it depends on the philosophy and the state of mind of the people, and it's a very local phenomenon, even inside the United States, where you have this outstanding place, Silicon Valley, that combines an amazing university with tons of money and a lot of creative people, and accepting of immigrants, because like half of the great minds of Silicon Valley were not even born there. So Silicon Valley, in any case, is a magnet for all these people. So I think it's a complex phenomenon.
Jack.
If I can just build on Martin's comments. When you say, let's say we say the US is responsible for X number of startups, X number of companies, I mean, the numbers are impressive. Last year, 2012, PwC put out some numbers just a few days ago. About $26 billion was invested in about 3,700 different startups and growth companies in the US. So the numbers are big, the numbers are impressive. But you drill a little bit down, you get a little more granular, and you say, who exactly is responsible for this among 307 million people in the US? And it turns out there's 225,000 people employed in Silicon Valley. There's 70,000 people in the tech scene in New York City, which is rising, good news there. Add in, say, another 100,000. Rest of the country, in terms of all the startups in Austin, Atlanta, DC area, also growth. You're talking about 0.2% of the population of the US responsible for the innovation for 307 million people. So really, it's very a narrow niche of people that are outputting tremendously productive companies and products and features. And that's particular to the success of the US. And so I think if we want to ask, why is the US so successful? It's why are these 400,000 specific people in an ecosystem that allows them to be so highly productive compared to the rest of the US and then other parts of the world?
So I want to be sure we're not misstating anything. We're talking about a geography and not a ethnic population. One of the things I sit on the board at the World Economic Forum, and one of the things I say to the board when I'm trying to describe Silicon Valley, half the people that are doing this were not born in the US. And one of the things I love is if you walk into a typical Silicon Valley company, it is a perfect analogy for the United Nations General Assembly. I just can count. I look at our employee rolls in some of these companies, and I'll see 20 or 30 different countries represented. Let me put a theory out, because I said this is year 47. And what I'm going to say now is a little bit dangerous, so I'm going to protect the people who said it to me. But a while back, I had the president of MIT ask if she could come out and spend the day with us. And the question was, Route 128 used to be great. Why is everything that's happening now happening today in the Valley? And we sat there with a bunch of academic people and professors and my partners, 3 of whom who had graduated from MIT and had taken jobs and were working at Excel. And what we came up with was 2 things. First of all, MIT is about hardware. The points you get there academically are for inventing pieces of hardware, and Silicon Valley's really about software. And so the software people graduate there. But we actually uncovered a much more important factor that I think is our #1 success factor, and it's a cultural issue that's called openness. When I went to work there in 1966, there was a bar called the Wagon Wheel. Friday night, you went to the Wagon Wheel. This is before Intel started. There might have been Fairchild, there might have been National Semiconductor, but engineers would get together, and then it wasn't 100,000, it was 10,000. And they would talk about what they were doing openly. In round 128, it was siloed companies. They were all competitors with each other. They would never go to the same bar and talk about things. So the open culture, I mean, how many times in San Francisco do you go out companies at lunch and just share ideas?
I think it's core to the Bay Area. And, you know, I think if you put it in a historical perspective, it's interesting to actually think about that this is kind of the area of the US that was made civil last. Can you say that? And I think that it's interesting
if it is yet, but
no, but I certainly think the fact that, you know, the western part of the U.S. are the closest to the pioneers, the people who had to figure out things. There was nothing given. There's no established structures. That means we have to collaborate on some level. We have to be innovative on some level to figure out things. And I think that that mindset certainly, makes us a particular kind of culture be successful. And you know, if you look at Europe, it's not just the U.S. that has these regional differences. For example, in Sweden, where I was born and raised, I think that Sweden is a fairly young country in terms of there's
you're talking about population, young.
Not just about the age of the population, but culturally. So Sweden was not a part of these big European nations back 300-400 years ago. The structures, I would say, are much less settled. And if you look at what Sweden looks like today, you have all of these huge brands coming out of these tiny nations, from IKEA to Ericsson to H&M.
Angry Birds.
Well, that's actually Finland, but the fact that, I
was trying to give you credit. Go ahead.
But the fact that, it's interesting that I want to tie this back actually to Skype and also what Martin mentioned, so to get a little bit of a conversation going. Yes, it's true that there is this sector where the western part of the U.S. is really successful, but this sector, if we call it IT, is expanding into essentially everything what we're doing. So it's not this small kind of hardware niche. It's not about social media. It's, you know, it's traveling. It's about communications. It's, you know, maybe in the future, it's how we manufacture things. It's spreading into essentially every sector that we're knowing. And so going back to Skype, well, I was recently at the European Commission in Parliament and was asked to talk about innovation and how Europe can kind of compete with the Bay Area. And so I looked up this data point about the 30 biggest IT companies per market cap right now. Where are they from? And so 17 of them are American. I believe 9 or 7, I don't remember anymore, are Asian. And 3 are European. So those 3, it's Ericsson, Nokia, and SAP. And we all know that some of these companies have challenges ahead of themselves. So if I'm, you know, if I'm building Skype, and I want to make sure that I build a global offering and a global company, who should I go to? Who should I work with? And that's going to be a really, really important challenge for us in Europe if we want to provide exciting jobs, if we want to provide a future for our children, frankly speaking. Is there these local champions who can provide the foundation for companies to grow from Europe? And I believe it's a not understood enough challenge, actually. So from my meetings in Brussels, I feel like actually we here in Europe, we talk too much about fiscal policy, I don't know, Schengen cooperation, all these things. Yes, these infrastructural things are super important, but if we want to build a future, no fiscal policy will create the jobs for our children. So it's all about how do we build the companies that can, you know, enable a new generation of entrepreneurs be successful.
Martin, you've written about this.
No, I wanted to, so LinkedIn created this category of thought leaders. They invited me to be a thought leader. And my 2 best read articles in LinkedIn are one about what's wrong with America and the other one about what's wrong with Europe. So I found both populations receptive to criticism. And let me just give a brief summary. Europe has unusual labor laws that are really conflicting with startups. For example, Europe has mandatory severance pay, right? So this concept of mandatory severance pay, which is unheard of in America, make it really hard to try things out and fail, which is what most startups do, because you have to try, fail, and pay, right? And so I propose for Europe a new regime for startups, which is 20, when you have up to 20 employees, you're less than 3 years old as a company, or you're not profitable, that labor laws shouldn't apply to you as a startup, that it should be a free negotiation between employers and employees, very much, not that the US doesn't have labor laws, but for example, stock option plans are freely negotiated. In Europe, if you have a stock option plan, then you're fired and you collect it on stock options. These stock options in many countries in Europe become part of your compensation, and your severance pay becomes so high that you can't get fired just because you cashed in your stock options, which became part of your severance pay. So there's a lot of, after building companies in America and building companies in Europe, I found very specific things that are wrong with the European law, which make it hard to do startups. The Cameron administration in the UK is the one that I see right now most sensitive to the needs of startups, and they're changing a lot of the laws that relate to startups to make it happen. The German administration is also quite sensitive to the needs of startups, and I think that's the UK and Germany are both changing in the right direction, away from laws which are meant to protect employees, but go and ask engineers in Silicon Valley how much they make, go and ask engineers in Europe how much they make, and see who's more protected, right? So that's as far as what's wrong with Europe. What's wrong with the United States is healthcare and the legal system. I would say these are two things that totally mess up the life of startups. In terms of the legal system, the legal uncertainty on patents and the legal uncertainty on anything. And my experience of doing business in the States, I mean, I got sued for the craziest things, okay, the most unexpected things. There's a legal environment that if I had to rate it, Europe versus America, I would say that working as an entrepreneur in Europe is so much easier and better than working in America because of the cost of legal. I mean, try taking a company public in Europe and in America. The cost of taking a company public in America, the legal bills are insane. And then the other thing that is extremely costly in America is healthcare. Like in Europe, you don't have to pay. In fact, I offer my employees in Spain, would you like private healthcare or would you like a raise? They say, we don't want private healthcare. State care is just as good. And in any case, private healthcare is 60 euros a month. Our employees in America, we have to pay like $700 a month or more for healthcare. The cost of social charges are high in Europe, but healthcare is extremely high in America and going out of control. So there's both environments need to address key issues. I think America needs to make the legal system safer for entrepreneurs and healthcare better for entrepreneurs. And I think Europe has to have the regime that Europe has may work for companies with 1,000 employees. That you have maternity leave for a year in a company of 1,000 employees is a statistical problem. Maternity leave of your chief marketing officer in a company of 10 employees is a disaster for your company.
Those are great points, and I want to come back to what I think is the key to this whole thing in a minute. Jack.
Sure. Just to also bring it back up to the macro level, you mentioned all the boards. I said I serve on the board of the X Prize. If people heard of the X Prize, these are $10 to $20 million prizes for grand challenges. And one of the things that continues to frustrate us / is an opportunity for us is to get more teams from Europe to participate in these challenges. There's something happening in the US that attracts tinkers, and attracts homegrown tinkers, and also attracts tinkers from elsewhere. Martin has now the second time come back to the US and is tinkering again in the US. And these teams that we have that are competing for the Google $25 million prize, for the Space Prize, for the DNA Genomics Prize, all these prizes, these are teams of tinkers. And this tinkering is very much embedded in the culture. And if you look at a lot of the non-US born entrepreneurs, many of them came to the US for education, and it wasn't so much they did well in the formal part of their education at Stanford or a place like that. It's that they had a particular tinkering experience outside of class, be it building an electric car or working on some project with a professor outside of class. And these tinkering experiences now emblazoned in Makers Fair, in MakerBot, in all these new experiences we see now. This whole tinkering culture has now also led to things like Kickstarter and Indiegogo. And so I would say that here in the US, we have particular accelerants. So Martin mentioned some of the decelerants, right, in terms of labor laws and things like that. We have accelerants in terms of Indiegogo, Kickstarter, and other crowd-funded platforms. There's now even a platform that if you wanted to invest in solar energy, you could do it on a crowdsourced basis. So we have innovation creating platforms that themselves add gas to the fire, like Kickstarter and things like that. These accelerants, I think, are quite important.
And I think what's interesting is it's not that you can just start a Kickstarter in your country or your region and then all of a sudden you'll be entrepreneurial. You've got to have the underlying foundation on culture. I did business school in Chicago, which was and I wanted to start a business there. I started a business there and I tried to raise money on it. Everybody looked at me like I was crazy. And Chicago, meanwhile, had tons of panels and discussions and focus groups and thought leaders. How do we become more entrepreneurial? How do we get more startups? And no one wanted to give me money. I went to California and I got a lot of money, or enough money to get started. It was $250,000. That was a lot of money to me at that time. And it allowed me then to get the company to the point where I was able to raise more money and ultimately sell it and have a good experience. But that would have been impossible in Chicago. So I think what was happening in Chicago that was interesting, when I went around and I said, I'm going to start a business. I'm not going to go work for Procter & Gamble or a CPG company out of Kellogg. People said, you are so crazy. That is so risky. And I said, well, what's the risk? I'm not putting in I'm putting in a little of my own money, but very, very minimal. If I lose that money, what's going to happen? I'm going to have this incredible life lesson about how to start a company and knowing what I'm capable of, and then knowing that I didn't have what it really took to do it, but I can take that experience and put it into other things. And that would be the worst case scenario. I'm not going to lose my house. I'm not going to lose anything else. And so the downside protection, culturally, as well as in terms of what I'd owe back to investors, which would be just maybe a bottle of wine, is very minimal. And in many ways, having that experience of not succeeding would have been more of an advantage to my career, my resume, than it would be to not have that experience.
So I think that you've heard, if I just take what you just heard from all four of the people, you heard in a different set of words what I actually think the biggest difference is. And if I could wave a magic wand tomorrow and change one thing in Europe that I think would spark a whole new wave of creativity, it would be a hard thing to do, but it would work. And it would be to change the culture of how you view failure. Because you gave a number of 3,500 startups last year. 2,000 of those are going to go away. I sat in your leaders, here, the people in Germany, in Merkel's office a few years ago, and I told her the secret of Silicon Valley was we can close a loser on a Friday night, in effect with no notice. Well, we'll give them 2 weeks, but that would be a long severance and a fair severance in the Valley. And the vice president who was in there got all upset, I think it was Munnerfering, and he said, well, you can't do that. It's not fair. And I said, but here's what you don't understand. We have a total shortage of engineers in Silicon Valley. Not only will most of those people have a job on Monday, 90% of them can stay in the same carpool. So what you see in those top 10 are the winners out of 10,000 experiments. Some of them only went to the angel round. Some of them didn't even get to the angel round. They were ideas. Some got angel money. Most of them died at the A round. And only because you had this great number, measured, as you said, 3,500 last year alone, that cream rose to the top. And if the policies in Europe, and I'm being very self-serving now, were more tolerant of failure overnight, because you've got every other thing going for you, you would have a different set of what happened 2-3 years down the road. Martin, am I right?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of benefits to the European way of life, which I think shouldn't change. For example, I think the vacations are a great thing that we have here in Europe and America.
What's a vacation?
America hasn't been seen in a long
translate?
Time. And we like to enjoy a lot of
Spanish
things.
Word?
They asked Nicolas, my partner, Nicolas Stenström, who's my partner and board member in FON, about work-life balance, and he says, well, it's kind of like this, that you work your ass off and then you get a life, right? And that was the work-life balance. I think there's a lot of things about the European lifestyle that are phenomenal, and that entrepreneurs from America who come to Europe will discover a lot about themselves other than work. But there are some things that are just killing startups, and I totally agree with you, and they have to do with a legal framework, including personal bankruptcy, which is another thing that doesn't exist in Europe. And I know some entrepreneurs who have failed in Europe and are haunted on their debts. For example, if you're an administrator of a company in Spain and you go bankrupt, but you fail to pay social security charges because the company was running out of money and you were paying people, but you were not paying the social security charges, there's nothing you can do to clean your record. The Spanish government will hunt you for the rest of your life. If you make another startup, the first thing they'll do, they'll make money out of you to collect the money of your failed startup. And those things just can't go on because people are afraid. They're saying, I'm not going to put my ass on the line to do a startup and be forever caught in this system. So yes, there's some very specific things that have to do with personal bankruptcy, with forced severance pay, with the way compensation works, that have to change.
Peter, closing thought?
Yeah, so I want to compliment that I think our legal framework whether it's the American or the European one, is always a reflection fundamentally of our values. The reason why we have these legal frameworks is they try to incorporate our values. And I think going back to the value of openness and allowing failure, I think one value that we do not communicate sufficiently in Europe besides this is just, what it is to build a company and why it is fun and how that can change the world towards a positive direction. And those stories, while they are being touted, I think, in the U.S. media all the time, Mark Zuckerberg is on every magazine in the country. Those stories somehow just not surfaced in the same way in
If I may add one thing, nobody probably in this room knows that the third richest man in the world, richer than Warren Buffett, is Spaniard Amancio Ortega, worth 55 billion, and he lives, I met him a few times, I've seen him, but he lives in hiding. He's not a national hero in Spain. And he's become such an incredible, successful entrepreneur within the tech, Zara, and this global empire that, the wealthiest man in the world is Carlos Slim. Actually, it's interesting that the top two only speak Spanish. Carlos Slim and Amancio Ortega, and then in the middle, stuck in the middle is Bill Gates. So, yes, you can do things away from the United States. You can become the third richest man in the world, but why should you live in hiding?
Well, the comment I would just leave you in finishing, I've just looked at Axel's portfolio of the companies we've done and what we're looking at, both in Europe and the US. And as I said to some of you earlier, this is year 47 in Silicon Valley for me. I've never seen more innovation going on both here and in Silicon Valley than at any other point in my life. We're, for a whole bunch of social reasons, both places are looking straight up. I was simply trying to, maybe even selfishly, offer ideas about how we might increase the slope in Europe because everything else is there. What Steve Jobs said, and I had the opportunity to be VP of marketing at Apple for a while, if you want to predict the future, invent it. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what we're doing. Thank you all very much.